I moved here because I wanted a quality kind of existence for myself and my children. And I moved here so that they would have good air to breathe and that they would have good water to drink. And the only thing that has changed about it is the application of the herbicides to that water. We're more heavily polluted than they are right in Springfield or L.A. My daughter became very ill just a year ago with a blood disease that has been associated with pesticides and herbicides, where her platelet count, the platelets clot the blood. Her platelet count went very low to where she was having severe bruising. And when she had her blood tested, the count was so low she was immediately hospitalized. And the herbicides were found there in her bloodstream and in my tap water. She was in the hospital for, 6 to 9 months off and on. And finally it resulted in the removal of her spleen. And her count could still go down at any time. While she would be in the hospital, she would get better, and then if I brought her home, her count would go down again. And so I can no longer run that risk of staying, and so I'm here today to pick up some belongings, and we've relocated, but it's nothing like Allegheny, which is our home and which we love, and it's our community, and I was told that if I didn't like the sprays, I could move, and I guess they've won.
In February 1979, Rose Lee moved from Allegheny, a small town on the coast of Oregon. Why she moved is part of the growing controversy over the expanding use of man-made poisons and how to dispose of them safely. Scientists, industry, government regulators, and citizen action groups are all gathering evidence, including problems Rose Lee and her neighbors are experiencing. In the next 2 hours, Nova looks at 2 toxic substances. First, dioxin, found in certain herbicides such as 2,4,5-T. Second, PCB, a chemically similar product. These substances may be affecting the lives and health of people in Oregon, veterans of the Vietnam War, workers who make the herbicide, citizens in North Carolina, New York's Love Canal, and men, women, children, and the unborn in many parts of the world. There is growing evidence that dioxin and PCB are the most dangerous and widespread contaminants on this planet. "100 miles from Allegheny is Alsea, in another part of Oregon, and with another problem.
In 1975, I myself experienced a miscarriage, which I at first thought might be just, in the normal course of affairs, but found out later that various agencies had been spraying 2,4,5-T in and around our immediate area here. I thought at first that may be coincidental until I discovered that there were many other women in the area who had miscarriages in the springtime, very closely following major herbicide applications.
About 100 miles south is Eve DeRock's Valley and Farm. She is still sick 2 years after 2,4,5-T was sprayed there.
In March of 1977, a helicopter hired by international paper flew into my valley and sprayed herbicide 2,4,5-T, Amchem's Weedone, through the whole valley, killing grass so that they could plant trees in the valley. The grass died on my part of the valley as well as on international papers. And a week later, my cows began to drop their babies. They aborted. Within a week after the spraying, the fish died in the creek. And after that, we found quail hens dead on their clutches and grouse that died with their young. And our dogs began to bring in slicks, aborted fawns from the woods. I felt like I was sick from summer flu or a summer cold, but I kept getting along. I didn't have a whole lot of strength. I felt tired. But it grew. It got worse until long in the fall, my body became sore. And the inside of my body was sore. And finally I came down with chills and fever, convulsions. I feel like my country is a traitor to the cause that put us here. I feel like for 21 years I taught kids that this was the land of the free, that there was no country like America, and that you didn't have to watch your neighbor to be sure that he didn't kill you. It's hard to believe.
To summarize the entire problem, in my view anyway, Oregon, which is supposed to be a beautiful, clean place to live, is being inundated because of our forestry industry and the supposed need to maximize forestry production. We're being inundated with the use of phenoxyherbicides. No one knows for sure how many tons of phenoxyherbicides are being dumped on the forest if you add up the private and the state and the federal forestry lands throughout the state. And I am very afraid that many of the people in Oregon who are drinking water saturated with herbicides and breathing air which has been covered with herbicides and walking through forests and pathways which have been sprayed are being slowly murdered by the use of these chemicals. That's my opinion.
It is the petrochemical industry that is facing these charges. Herbicides are derived from the industry's basic raw materials, petroleum, coal, and natural gas. All are made up of the remains of once living organisms that have decayed under heat and pressure for millions of years. To get the maximum yield of gasoline and other products from crude oil, the industry developed ways to chemically change the components of petroleum. The first step is to separate the components into their boiling ranges. This is done in a fractionating tower. The oil is heated until it turns to vapor. The vapors are then injected into the fractionating tower. As they rise under pressure, they cool, condense into trays, and are siphoned off. The fractions with the highest boiling point are at the bottom of the tower and are mainly used for heavy fuels. Rising through the tower are lubricating oils, diesel fuels, kerosene, and near the top, various gasoline compounds. How are herbicides derived from these compounds? Like other petrochemical products, gasoline is a mix of hydrocarbons, various compounds of hydrogen and carbon. The basic structure of hydrocarbons is simple but flexible. A carbon atom can link by 4 bonds either to other carbons or to hydrogens or to both. Because hydrocarbons have the ability to link together, they can form long chains of molecules. And because carbon can also join to itself in rings, even more complex structures can form, such as cyclohexane. The industry then draws off the distillates, like cyclohexane, from the tower and either cracks their molecular structure to form smaller molecules or reforms them into new structures. Some duplicate natural substances. Others are completely new or synthetic substances not found in nature. This is done by adding heat and chemical catalysts. For example, cyclohexane, the gasoline compound, is reformed into benzene through this process. A catalyst removes hydrogen molecules until benzene is made. It is from this basic ring structure of benzene that the 2 synthetic toxic substances we will focus on are derived. The result of this and other similar processes A lot more gasoline for each barrel of crude oil, as well as thousands of synthetic petrochemicals, 80 billion pounds of them a year. A vast new industry of herbicides, fibers, fertilizers, plastics, some life-saving, some cause problems. Biologist and author Barry Commoner.
There's a very important thing about what the petrochemical industry does. It makes organic compounds, most of which do not occur in living things. For example, nylon. Now, every living compound, every compound that's made in living things, has to be compatible with life. One of the ways in which it has to be compatible is that it's got to be biodegradable. It's got to break down. Because if every living thing didn't break down, all of the ecological cycles on which we depend wouldn't exist. For example, if we made cellulose and it didn't break down, the world would be covered with cellulose. One way to think about it is this, that intrinsically, inherently, the chemistry of life is so flexible that some cell at some point could have synthesized DDT, let's say 2 billion years ago. And that cell hasn't been heard from since. In other words, DDT was rejected in the course of the chemical evolution of living things. Now, when the petrochemical industry comes along and makes it and disseminates it into the environment, there are toxic results.
You can look at the record of products and achievements of the petrochemical industry and of the chemical industry. Achievements that include the basic materials that go into drugs and pharmaceuticals, the basic materials that make your life and mine safer, richer, easier, more productive. You have to look only at vinyls and other plastic substitutes that you can look at in automobiles and furniture and other areas. You use them in your home, you use them in your cars, you use them in your everyday wearing apparel, and they provide benefits that the normal or natural do not provide. They breathe better, they last longer, they wash easier, they are resistant to soil and stain. To say that this is a disadvantage or that we have perverted nature, I think is to simply be non-realistic with what's happening in the world today.
The last 25 years, there have been a series of substances put into the environment by the petrochemical industry which have caused trouble. DDT, for example, which began to kill off bird populations. Ketone, which has essentially ruined the fishing industry in Chesapeake Bay. PBB, a substance used as a fire retardant that accidentally got into some feed in Michigan, has resulted in enormous economic costs. Livestock had to be killed, so on. And from medical surveys that have been done, has gotten into people's bodies and seems to be causing medical effects. It's clear that the introduction of synthetic chemicals has caused a series of health effects and environmental effects that did not exist before these substances were produced and disseminated by the industry.
It was in Fort Detrick, Maryland, during World War II that the history of herbicides began. Laboratories here started to secretly develop plant killers for military use. Since then, the herbicide story has been filled with disputed industry claims of product safety. The herbicides developed at Fort Detrick were not used during the war, but afterwards they were sold commercially to home gardeners and farmers to kill weeds and brush. Federal agencies assured the public such uses were safe, but problems were not far off. There was an explosion at a 245T manufacturing unit in 1949 at Nitro, West Virginia, the first of several industrial accidents with this herbicide. The Monsanto Company's study of the 122 injured workers has not yet been made fully public. Less than 10 years later, a similar accident in Germany, and a significant discovery. 245T contained a deadly contaminant. This is a molecule of 245T. The actual manufacturing process is based on chemical properties of the benzene ring, which looks like this. In order to get 245T, the substance goes through several chemical stages. The benzene is chlorinated. Sodium hydroxide is added, and the molecule becomes sodium trichlorophenate. At this point, as the German scientists discovered, a critical and unwanted impurity is formed. In a side reaction, two sodium trichlorophenates join together to form dioxin, one of the most poisonous substances made by man. The full name for dioxin is tetrachlorodibenzoparadioxin, often abbreviated as TCDD. The dioxin is a contaminant that remains as the process continues. The next step is trichlorophenol, or TCP, and it is TCP that is the base material for making the herbicide 2,4,5-T. As 2,4,5-T is produced, the dioxin is still there, as little as 1/10 of a part per million, equivalent to a few tablespoons of poison mixed into the water of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Widespread public concern over pesticides and herbicides began with Rachel Carson's book in 1962. The next year, the Science Advisory Committee in the Kennedy administration prepared a report on pesticides and the environment. This led to a government-backed study. Pregnant mice and rats were given 2,4,5-T. At the lowest dosages, 40% of the fetuses showed teratogenic effects, birth deformities. 90 to 100% were deformed among animals fed the highest doses. It was the first time the product had been tested for this danger, although it had been sold to the public for over a decade. These explosive findings were kept secret for 2 years until establishment of the Merak Commission in 1969, an HEW study of health impacts of herbicides. Dr. Samuel Epstein, a member of the commission, heard about the study.
I was aware that the studies had been done because I'd seen bootlegged copies of the results of these studies, but I was unable to obtain formal copies of the study to evaluate in the course of the HEW Commission work. And it was only subsequent to threats of resignation and dissolution of the panel that the data became available, and it became very clear that 2,4,5-T was unequivocally teratogenic. Now, there are possibilities there were problems of national security involved in the unwillingness of HEW to make these information available, because 2,4,5-T was being very widely used in Vietnam at the time.
The Defense Department finally got a chance to use its Fort Detrick research. They had secretly launched a widespread aerial spraying program in Vietnam using Agent Orange, an equal mixture of the herbicides 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D. The purpose? To destroy broadleaf trees so that the enemy would be more visible. The herbicides, with unknown and varying amounts of dioxin contaminant, penetrated the waxy covering of the leaves and were absorbed into the plant systems. Within a week, most plants died. By the late 1960s, the secret was out and added to pressure for government action to stop using 2,4,5-T in America as well as in Vietnam.
I welcome those present for the first of these 2 days of hearings we're holding to examine the effect of the herbicide known as 2,4,5-T on man and the environment.
On the same date as Senator Philip Hart's hearing, two dramatic announcements were made. First, the Defense Department announced spraying would stop in Vietnam. Second, the government banned the use of 2,4,5-T for American home gardens and areas near bodies of water. The substance was rated a potential health hazard to women of childbearing age.
Issued by the government.
To wait until tests and retests are performed might unnecessarily expose people to hazards which we will eventually regret. That's the point.
But 44 million pounds of 2,4,5-T had already been sprayed on forest and farmland in South Vietnam. And there were reports linking that to an unusual number of birth deformities among children. Several teams of American scientists went to Vietnam to investigate. One group included Harvard biologist Matthew Messelson.
It was generally and almost universally reported that spraying killed animals. It was also generally agreed that although some deaths amongst humans were attributed to spraying of herbicides, this was a rather rare report. And all agreed that people living in the mountains in the northern part of South Vietnam consistently reported high frequency of human mortality amongst young people and older people after spraying. After spraying with what? Those people didn't know it. Was it really due to the spraying? We don't know. How could it be explained that one population would suffer mortality and another not? If, in fact, that's the case, I have only a speculation, and that is that some batches of dioxin, of 2,4,5-T, were exceedingly contaminated, and most were not. And it may have been that some of those bad batches were sprayed in the Montagnard region. But I don't think we can conclude anything with certainty from the entire Vietnamese experience.
Despite the partial ban in America, 80 to 90% of the use of 2,4,5-T and another dioxin-contaminated herbicide called Silvex continue. At least 7 million pounds of those herbicides were sprayed on over 5 million acres every year, on range and pasture land, rice crops, rights-of-way, and forests. Manufacturers quietly won every fight to stop the use of their products. The poisons again grew to national controversy in 1978 because rural Northwest residents complained about their use on forests. Loggers used the spray twice, first to rid the site of all other plant life after trees are cut down. Second, a few years after new fir trees are planted, competing growth is considered a problem. So spraying is used again to destroy all the broadleaf growth as if they were weeds. The narrow-leafed fir trees survive.
This area demonstrates one of the critical brush problems that we have to contend with. The area was planted about 10 years ago, and unfortunately the brush has come in and pretty well captured a lot of the growing space, as you can see. A few trees are going to make it, but by and large, the area just isn't as fully stocked with conifers as we would hope it to be. We can contrast that area with an area up here in which we've been able to use herbicides very successfully. And you will notice that the area is completely stocked. Lots of young seedlings, free to grow, and on their way to become another commercial forest. And that is because of the use of herbicides.
Now that 2,4,5-T and Silvex are established tools of forest production, the forest industry has economic fears about being forced to get along without them.
The basic thing that would happen would be that the forests would not be as productive as they could be. And this would have, of course, a very significant economic impact somewhere down the road. A study recently completed by the Oregon State Department of Forestry in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service indicated that within the state of Oregon alone, this economic impact would have proportions on the order of several $100 million in value, lost value, because we were unable to grow a healthy new forest.
Industry claims of lost value mean fewer jobs because there would be fewer trees to cut down and turn into wood products. Jobs and profitable wood products usually win economic arguments in the Northwest. But there are other ways of logging that don't use the spray and have other economic implications. From the Northwest Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticides, Marla Gillum.
It's our feeling that eliminating the usage of toxic herbicides, especially the dioxin ones, in the forests will create more jobs because the alternative to herbicides is manual intensive labor. This would provide jobs in the local, rurally depressed economies. It would keep the money in the pocket of the local people instead of shipping it off somewhere.
There are two ways the local jobs are created. First, forest workers are employed to burn debris and slash after the trees are cut down. Next, they return to the site a few years later to cut back the growth that competes with the fir trees. Only a few foresters favor this technique. One is Otis Lowry.
I'm a government forester with 8 years' experience. I'm responsible for reforestation on 53,000 acres of federal land. I was trained in the use of herbicides. I used to believe in herbicides. Now I believe they're immoral because of the human health hazard. Besides, I've decided over several years of research and personal observation they're not necessary. This stand behind me illustrates that point quite nicely. The only thing that happened in this stand after it was logged is that the logging debris and slash was burned, providing a seed bed for the large trees above the young stand to reseed it. What we see here is a stand that was born in the early 1950s. It had no help from herbicide. Herbicide, in my opinion, is not a good tool.
I guess I disagree with that kind of a conclusion that the use of 2,4,5-T would be immoral. In fact, we're not aware of any substantiated reports of such human health effects. 2,4,5-T enjoys a substantial record of safety. When we compare, for instance, the levels of 2,4,5-T that are in the forest with the levels that would be required to produce human health effects or effects on other kinds of animals, we don't find those levels present. From that, why I conclude that this kind of exposure is not occurring, and therefore we would not expect there to be human health effects.
The Forest Service has gathered samples to measure the 2,4,5-T levels after spraying. But what level of the dioxin or TCDD contaminant in the 2,4,5-T is safe for people is an unresolved critical dispute. Logan Norris's answer partly relies on test data supplied by Dow Chemical Company, largest manufacturer of the substance.
Our studies have indicated that while TCDD and 2,4,5-T are toxic to animals at certain dose levels, we have been able to define dose levels and experimental conditions under which these chemicals do not have toxic effects, and it has given us the comfort that products such as 2,4,5-T and the other phenoxyherbicides can be manufactured and used safely.
Dow's safe level study involved feeding dioxin to rats at a level of 22 parts per trillion over a 2-year period. As a result, Dow claims there is no human health problem if the herbicide is found in a person's body up to these levels.
If an individual is exposed to one of the phenoxyherbicides, it is absorbed and could be found in the blood of the exposed individual. But the exposure under use conditions of those phenoxyherbicide products, as we're using them in this country, the exposure is low enough that we would not expect them to be associated with health problems.
Industry's findings of safety for their own products are challenged by some independent studies. At the University of Wisconsin, Dr. James Allen has been feeding minute quantities of dioxin to rhesus monkeys.
Oh, yeah. These are control and experimental animals on a dioxin study. This particular animal has received 50 parts per trillion of tetrachlorodibenzodioxin in its diet for approximately 2 years. It is consumed in the neighborhood of about 1 microgram per kilogram of body weight. Now, you will note the difference in the appearance of the two animals. Note the abundance of hair about the face in this particular animal, and the presence of eyelids and eyelashes. In this particular animal right here, the absence of hair, the absence of eyelashes, and the general scruffy appearance of the skin. Now, to give you an idea, these animals were placed on the diet approximately 2 years ago, and after they'd been on the diet for 6 months, they were bred and experienced a near complete reproductive failure. They had difficulty in conceiving, difficulty in maintaining pregnancy, and those that were born were small, and we are presently in the process of evaluating their learning and behavioral development. So it would appear that even extremely low levels of dioxins have moderate effects on the adults, but very distinct effect upon their reproductive capabilities and on the offspring of these monkeys. The dioxins are extremely toxic. There's no question about it. And to date, we have not found a level in the monkeys that are not toxic. We're now down to 25 parts per trillion in the diet, and we subsequently plan to go to 5 parts per trillion in the diet of these experimental animals in an attempt to find a no-effect level.
While the animal studies continue, the spraying continues. And Oregon residents are convinced their health problems are linked to it. The Hodads plant trees after a site is sprayed. They may come in contact with the poison by breathing it in, drinking contaminated water, or by absorption through the skin.
I went to the hospital and had a blood sample taken and sent to GHT laboratories in California, and they tested it, and it turned out that there was 5.5 milligrams per liter of, or micrograms per liter of Silvex in my blood. And for 2 weeks, I had fever, and I was really dizzy, really weak. I couldn't concentrate. I had lots of appetite. I started feeling better for a few days, and then my period came, and I was back in bed for 4 days with the same symptoms. I feel bitter in a way. I feel that my body was exposed to some kind of chemical that I had no control over, and I'm scared because I don't know what it'll do to me in the long run.
This laboratory report states there are 1,000 parts per trillion of Silvex in the blood of Angie Lee from Allegheny.
Okay.
Although only 1/10,000,000th part of that is dioxin, larger amounts could be stored in her body.
Well, you're such a good patient. I can't believe it. You just don't move.
Whether it is the cause of her health problems remains unknown.
Oh, does that one hurt? Okay. Why don't you put your finger on that?
Another unknown is how much dioxin persists in the environment after it is sprayed. Some claim that over time, dioxin should biodegrade or photodegrade and thus become harmless. But does it?
TCDD has been shown to degrade rapidly when it is exposed to sunlight. The question is, in an environment such as this, where it might be shady or may not be full sun, whether that same degradation would occur. I believe that rate of degradation would be slower than has been reported in full sunlight. But there is ultraviolet radiation here, even on an overcast day such as today. I believe that degradation of TCDD would continue, perhaps not as fast as has been reported in full sunlight.
There is no question. There are scientific data that would indicate that the dioxins do, in fact, undergo degradation due to exposure to sunlight, photodegradation. However, there are recent data, such as the Love Canal situation, such as the presence of relatively high levels of dioxin in fish, they would indicate that all of the compounds do not break down. Thus, our concept of there being no problem with the dioxin, that it undergoes rapid degradation, need be reevaluated.
Not only are there arguments over safe levels and how much it degrades, industry also disputes claims that dioxin accumulates in the body in a dangerous way.
It's easy to attack a chemical, you know. It's easy to, what should I say, practice chemical McCarthyism. This is basically to attack chemicals by innuendos and outright lies. Simply because chemicals are being used as a means of achieving environmental goals, really. The attack is not scientific, it's purely emotional. You know, the public does not understand, and we unfortunately haven't successfully communicated to the public as yet. Take 2,4,5-T, for example. 2,4,5-T is about as toxic as aspirin. The safety factor in the use of 2,4,5-T is far greater than the safety factors in the use of aspirin. Now, does the public understand that?
A bottle full of aspirin, if taken all at once, will cause serious harm, even possibly killing an individual. But most people can eat 2 aspirins a day for the rest of their lives without suffering serious consequences. The harm caused by aspirins does not add up in our bodies over a long period of time. In contrast, with TCDD, it's been shown in monkey experiments that even the smallest amounts, when fed to monkeys over a period of time, cause death and smaller lengths of time, abortions. So that the harm caused by TCDD in the monkeys adds up, not like aspirin. We can take 4 tablets of aspirin, that doesn't add the harm doesn't add up. So I'm concerned about TCDD because of this additive nature of the harm caused in our bodies.
They've got to start listening to some of the residents and our rights. I mean, I have to move because of my fear and my knowing that I am exposed to this stuff, and I have no choice in the matter. There's no, my daughter has no choice of whether or not she drinks these things. I don't particularly want to drink the diesel fuel that they mix the herbicides with. And when they change, or suppose they change 2,4,5-T or 2,4-D this year, then what are they going to be spraying in there next year? And will they have to let us know what they're putting in that water next year? I mean, the whole thing is insidious. You'll be talking to some other people. I feel like I'm just up against the wall, you know, and that I've done all that I can do peaceably at this point, and now I just have to move and pick up the pieces and start over. But I intend to work as long as I can to get the spraying stopped.
The complaints by Rosalie and her neighbors and by the Hodads did not stop the spraying in the Oregon forests. But Bonnie Hill and the other women from Alsea were more successful after they wrote a letter in April 1978 to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency.
At the time that we wrote our letter and drew up our chart, we had discovered 11 miscarriages suffered by 8 women. We looked into those pretty thoroughly before we said anything. At this point, 22 miscarriages suffered by 17 women have come to our attention, although we haven't investigated each of those with the thoroughness that we did the original 11. We did some calculations on our own trying to discover the rate of miscarriage in Alsea, and we have found that in the years particularly of 76 and 77, when the spraying years were the heaviest in this area, just based on the miscarriages that we know about, and by the way, experts agree with us about the number of live births that occur in this area, the rate of miscarriage in Alsea in 1976 was 40%, and in 1977 it was 45%. Which is much higher than the national average. Medical textbooks say anywhere from 10 to 20%. And those are just the miscarriages that we know about.
Because of Bonnie Hill's letter, EPA studied records of miscarriages in the Alsea area and compared them to records in other parts of the state where there had been no spraying.
There's never been much question that it causes problems in animals. That final link came when we completed what's been called the Alsea 2 study, which is a study of almost 500 miscarriages that took place over a 6-year period in both the study and control areas in Oregon. These studies demonstrated that women were, in fact, having the same sorts of effects in the study area where 2,4,5-T is used as one would expect them to have from test animals. And we felt that we therefore had the link. We had the effect in animals, the adverse effect on fetuses in animals, coupled with statistical impact on women in the study area of Oregon, the Alsea Basin.
Bonnie Hill won her fight. On February 28, 1979, EPA issued its first emergency ban, temporarily barring use of 2,4,5-T and Silvex on forests and rights-of-way all over the country. Despite a decade of knowledge of birth defects in animals, EPA had not acted until human effects were found.
The human population is being used as guinea pigs, while these substances are on the market. While their risks are being debated and the benefits, the products, unless they are suspended, are being used and are continued to be used.
I don't agree at all that human beings are either guinea pigs or test animals for the chemical industry or medicine or any other field of endeavor of man. I will say simply that we cannot live in a zero-risk environment. We never have, we never will. It is our desire in industry, it is government's desire, it is society's desire that we minimize those risks that we understand and can perceive at the outset. And industry under law is responsible for doing that today.
There is some risk in perhaps the use of all pesticides, but we're not out for a zero-risk situation. our legislative mandate requires that we look at risks and benefits. And zero risk is not the objective of pesticide regulation.
I think that people's lives, their health, is the most important thing that a person has, and that no amount of economic benefit can justify the loss of a single life. Now, that's silly, maybe, to some people. It's silly to people that are invested in the chemical industry, but that's my opinion. And when we are using these chemicals, not in a small scale, but on a gigantic scale, which cannot be recalled, cannot be reversed, and cannot be corrected, this risk-benefit analysis has to fall. Put on purely economic terms, though, eventually we're going to find out that the use of these chemicals is going to cost us billions in medical and health care, hospitalization care, and in injuries to people, far more than any possible additional timber yield could cause.
The herbicide issue in the Northwest has temporarily subsided. But using these substances for 30 years may have created a deadly legacy. Dioxin could have latent effects. Some American veterans of the Vietnam War are now claiming the health problems they have today are connected to their exposure a decade earlier to the dioxin-contaminated Agent Orange. Over 2,000 veterans have so far filed inquiries with the Veterans Administration. New organizations of veterans have formed centering on the question.
The suspected defoliation poisoning cases that we have for veterans who served in Vietnam bear a striking resemblance to the same types of chemical exposures that have occurred here in the United States. Before me, I have contact cards for veterans who were in defoliated areas who are exhibiting symptoms, and some of these range from general malaise to skin cancer, anarrhythmia of the heart, birth defects in their children, cancers of the liver, kidney, and spleen. Some of the individuals that have filed cases within the past year have since died.
Well, mine started with my discharge. I was discharged for a nervous disorder. And since then, I had 2 stillborn children, one of which was severely deformed. Come up with rashes. I have rashes on my arms, on my back. I have respiratory problems, shake head to toe, shake all the time. It's just a rash of things that keep happening. I have weight fluctuations. They just continue. Nothing I've done. I went for medical help, and nothing I've done so far, especially for the rashes, has helped.
How can people show effects years after exposure?
It's entirely possible that what happened was that the dioxin in the 2,4,5-T that was contained in the Agent Orange got into their bodies and was stored in the fat, where it remained until, for example, recently, when, let's say, a veteran becomes sick, loses weight, fat breaks down, the dioxin comes out of the fat and begins to exert its toxic effects on the body. Now, that's just a hypothesis, but exactly that sort of thing was noticed in fish in the Mississippi River some years ago who had been poisoned by DDT. They picked up the DDT during the summer, stored it in their fat, showed no symptoms. In the winter, when they broke the fat down, they became poisoned and many of them died.
Well, now that this issue has come up, there's a lot of fear there. Now we won't have any more children. I got a vasectomy to ensure the fact that that wasn't going to be the case again. We're not going through that again. We were lucky to have one that's healthy, we think. So.
Some veterans, like Milton Ross, believe Agent Orange also affected their children.
After my tour in Vietnam, I came home and I was married and I had a son. And my son had some congenital defects that neither my wife's family had experienced before nor mine. There was the defects on the hands and on all extremities, and it's more pronounced on the right side of the body. So we really couldn't explain why he had the types of defects that he did, and the doctors were not able to explain this to us.
One explanation for the boy's problem is the possibility that dioxin could interfere with DNA.
The dioxin molecule looks like this, 2 rings with 4 chlorines around the edges. One of the reasons I became interested in dioxin was that its chemical shape resembles a great deal molecules that I have studied in the laboratory, which I and others know to be powerful causers of inherited alterations, mutations. On the basis of the similarity in structure, I would predict that TCDD would, among other things, get inserted into the DNA structure and cause in the DNA mutations and other damage. Let me illustrate for you how that works first with the compound which is known. This is a compound I've studied. It's called acridine yellow. It fits into the DNA molecule, sliding between the base pairs. The TCDD molecule, I would expect, from what I know about the structure of mutagens, could also insert itself into the DNA molecule, and I would expect cause similar types of damage.
My husband did serve in Vietnam. He did receive an honorable discharge. You know, he went over to really do something for his country. And we've been having tremendous problems. And we've just had the door slammed in our face from the Veterans Administration. No answers, you know, no responsiveness at all.
At the Veterans Administration headquarters in Washington, Dr. William Jacoby.
The claims that the Veterans Administration is not moving quickly enough are heard. They're heard loud and clear. However, in order to establish a scientific fact takes time. And if we're going to look at this in a logical and scientific way, then we must get the true answer. They need that answer. We need the answer. And we're searching for truth.
It's going to take them 10, 15, 20 years for them to research this issue. In the meantime, a lot of people who served honorably in Vietnam and who were willing to go over there and do what they could for this country are going to suffer or either perish, you know, while we're waiting for the Veterans Administration to play bureaucrat.
At the present time, there is been no established chronic health-related effect of herbicide exposure in Vietnam veterans. Now, this has to be taken in light of where does our information come from? The information on chronic exposure is not in depth. Many of the industrial accidents, and this is where we get most of our information are from industrial accidents, and it has to be stressed there that these are heavy exposures. They're in individuals who actually worked in the industry. But the long-term follow-up of many of these individuals, even with industrial accidents, has not taken place.
An Air Force study of some veterans who handled Agent Orange in Vietnam begins in October 1979. Tissue biopsies of a small group of veterans are also being analyzed in a Veterans Administration study, due for completion early in 1980. Whether or not dioxin is harming veterans or their families is still conjecture. But there is another legacy that should be known, and that is with respect to the workers who make and handle the herbicides. What is their health record?
We do not see dioxins or testing of dioxins causing problems when they're tested at low levels in animals, and by following the health of our employees in the workplace, we don't see those employees who have potential or low-level exposures to dioxins having health problems. Dioxins are toxic. There's no question about that. Every material is toxic to some extent, but there are degrees of toxicity. The real question that we've got to look at and answer, is there a hazard? Is there a probability of injury occurring? And I think this is where we get into a problem many times. We talk about hazardous materials when there is no such thing as a hazardous material, unless it is used in a wrong method. It is abused. The exposure is too high.
At Dow's Midland, Michigan plant, the exposure had been too high. It has been reported that 70 workers had such serious health problems in 1964 that the 245T operation was shut down for several months and rebuilt. Dr. Benjamin Holder, Dow's medical department director, told government chemists about the workers' illnesses. They included the same range of disorders described by the Vietnam veterans and the tree planters and lasted up to 3 years. This kind of danger to workers brought a powerful pressure group into the argument.
If they wish it to be a safe industry and they claim it's a safe industry, then let us see primary data. Number one, what do we work with? Name it. They refuse to do that. Let us see the results of working in the industry. Mortality data, morbidity data, mortality being, of course, deaths, morbidity being disease. They've stonewalled us on this question. They're instituting mandatory physical programs, which are a culling out process. In other words, don't change the workplace, alter the worker. If he's diseased by virtue of his work experience, you remove him.
In Nitro, West Virginia, site of the 1949 explosion, some workers who made and handled 2,4,5-T are now in an epidemiology study sponsored by their union, the United Steelworkers, in cooperation with New York's Mount Sinai Hospital.
Okay, take a deep breath in and blast it out. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Push, 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 push.
Their lungs are tested to learn if exposure to 2,4,5-T has affected them.
Push, 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 keep going, push.
The nervous system is examined for possible damage. It is the first public American study of 2,4,5-T workers, and in this case, Monsanto is cooperating with the union by providing records of the employees. Conducting the study are a team of Mount Sinai specialists headed by Dr. Marion Moses.
They made this chemical from 1948 to 1969 at the plant here in Nitro. The union approached us. They were concerned about what they'd been hearing about dioxin. 2,4,5-T is contaminated with dioxin. They knew that EPA was in the process of possibly suspending this chemical. They were concerned, are there health effects? We've got a lot of workers who were sick from this that had what they call skin poisoning or weed bumps. It's very difficult to know what is related to this, what's related to other chemicals. The only way to find out is to try to get information from a group of workers that have had this chronic exposure. It's a very, very dangerous chemical. Whether or not it's dangerous under these forms of exposure, is it bad to have chloracne most of your life? Will you die of cancer? This is what the workers want to know. What's going to happen to me? We'd like to try to get the answers to some of those questions. We may not. We may not.
Two groups are being studied. Employees who worked with 2,4,5-T on a regular basis and a cleanup crew that went into the unit after the 1949 accident. Some men were in the unit 4 hours after the incident.
The people protested going in this unit to work. We even had a walkout because of it. The company and the union got together, and we set it up on a voluntary basis to work in there. And if they did this, they would get a 4 cent per hour premium pay for working in 2,4,5-T, wherever it was being processed, the dry and the packaging part, the processing of it in any manner. They were given a 4 cents premium pay for this particular work.
I asked to be transferred out of there because I was broke out pretty bad, and it just seemed like these blackheads. They just formed all over you. I even had them in my hair, and eyebrows, and hands, and arms, legs. The only place I don't think I had them is the bottom of my feet.
There's a tremendous movement through the labor union, trade union movement now to start dealing with these hazards. As more and more people in the labor movement become aware of this, as there's more and more worker education, I think this is how these problems are going to be solved, because the workers, and that's clout from another side. I think that's going to be one of the ways that this problem is going to be solved. I think it's going to be the most important way. It's going to come from workers themselves.
Humans are the most replaceable item in a productive process. If a machine breaks down, people can get awfully exercised. It costs money to repair it and replace it. There are millions of human beings out there who will replace any of us doing what we're doing. Very easy. Once you move that human out the door, you never even think about him anymore, or her.
Why kill workers? I mean, this makes no sense at all. That's the most difficult thing to replace, is a skilled, trained person, all right? So even from an economic standpoint, that makes no sense. From a humanistic standpoint, it makes absolutely no sense. And I do not accept the fact that corporations or people who work in corporations are not humanistic. I think they are.
Industries claim that they don't wish to hurt people is just a pious platitude. Sure, a guy doesn't wake up in the morning and says, I'm going to go out and snuff out half a dozen people. No one prefers to think in those terms. But when they enter that factory or they enter a corporate office, the bottom line is profit. The fact of the matter is that with a very sophisticated medical establishment, with a rather large government apparatus, a large corporate apparatus, none of these entities ever discover the ailments. Workers discover them. In fact, I suggest that the sophisticated apparatus is there to disguise and to obfuscate and to conceal. The scientific establishment generally is one where something is discovered, but it's never discussed with the potential victim or the victims. That's why we're very suspicious and we're very cynical about the ability of science to protect us. Science in service of people would be protective, but science in service of corporations can never protect, it can only conceal.
The current dispute with 2,4,5-T and Silvex is this. 30% of their use continues on rangeland and rice crops. The EPA ban is neither total nor permanent. Dr. Epstein believes his commission's recommendations are still pertinent.
I would suggest that there is ample basis for developing restrictions against the whole class of phenoxyherbicides, as indeed was recommended by the Merak Commission in 1969, where the panel unanimously recommended that any agent or any pesticide which has unequivocally been shown to produce birth defects in experimental animals or humans should be banned or suspended.
Dioxin not only causes birth defects, it also causes cancer. A University of Wisconsin study reports that tumors developed in a significant percentage of rats that were fed dioxin at levels as low as 5 parts per trillion. There may be a vital connection between the tumor findings and reports that dioxin accumulates in the fat of cattle grazing on land sprayed with these herbicides.
Speaking as an individual, I certainly do not want the members of my family to eat beef from rangeland which has been sprayed with 2,4,5-T. And if I could vote on that issue, that's how I would vote. But as a scientist, I think my responsibility is to present a reasonable estimate of the numerical factors involved and let other people make their own decisions. The amounts of dioxin getting into the American diet are near the upper range of what I estimate is possible. Then you could say that if the rat data can be extrapolated to people, that thousands of Americans die every year from tumors which are induced because of their exposure to dioxin.
There is a crucial public health question in this. The congressional mandate for EPA herbicide regulation is not zero risk. Must this mean that EPA has to wait for human health effects, as they did in the Alcee miscarriage study, before action is taken to permanently ban chemicals already proven toxic for animals? If there has to be a human body count, then who is the government protecting?
The material on this video cassette is protected by copyright. It is for private use only, and any other use, including copying, reproducing, or performance in public, in whole or in part, is prohibited by law.